Hey guys, stay with First Place Auto Parts. Thanks for joining me out in the shop today. You know, recently I did a video for our YouTube channel where I showed you how to de-winterize your classic American muscle car or truck. And one of the processes for me on my 56 Chevy behind me is I need to adjust the valve train. In the fall, I back off the rocker arms and all the preload on my lifters so that the springs don't stay compressed all winter. It's just something I've done every year. In the process of setting my valves, one of the things that I found out was that the aluminum roller rockers that I've had on this car for over 10 years, the metal axle that has the roller tip that keeps it on the rocker arm, had started to work their way loose. Look, you can see how much this pin is out. As a matter of fact, it started doing that on a bunch of them. One of the things I know about aluminum is that it work hardens over time. I could drive this pin back in, but the reality is this is gonna come out, and if it comes out, it's gonna be catastrophic. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna upgrade my rocker arms to some stainless steel roller rockers. Again, roller fulcrum, roller tip, but now I need to adjust the valves. And in today's video, what I'm gonna do, guys, I'm gonna show you how to adjust the proper preload on your rocker arm so that your valve train lash is set properly. So guys, stay tuned. Today we're talking rocker arms and preload adjustment for your valve train. Hey guys, if you like today's video, please consider subscribing to the First Place Auto Parts YouTube channel. We're going to continually be adding new videos every week where we show you how to put new parts on. We take a look at the latest parts that are available, and we go to some pretty cool car guy stuff I'm pretty sure you're going to want to see. Okay, now before we get started, there's some simple tools you're going to need. Now look, I'm not going to tell you how to take your valve covers off. That's something each car is a little different, but you will have to take both valve covers off. The tools are pretty straightforward. If you have poly locks or lock nuts on your vehicle, you're going to need an Allen wrench that actually fits the set screw in between it and the proper size wrench for the nut itself. In my case, it's a 5/8 wrench and this Allen wrench. If you have hydraulic lifters, really that's all you're going to need. If you have solid lifters in your engine, you're going to need a set of feeler gauges like these here. Again, not a lot of tools involved in this, and the one thing that I recommend, look, you can either rotate the motor a couple different ways. You can do it with a large breaker bar and turn it clockwise in the rotation of the engine the way it normally turns, or you can install one of these super easy remote starters. There's two clips. One goes on the power lead on your starter. The other goes on for a GM starter, for example. It goes on your S terminal. It's easy to do if you can reach your starter with, you know, somewhat easy access. This thing will make your life a lot easier. Otherwise, what you're going to need is you're going to need someone in your car, and basically they're going to have to hit the ignition switch to bump that motor over, because what we're going to do is we're going to be rotating that motor so that that camshaft turns, and we can find what's called the base circle on the cam. That's where we're going to be adjusting the preload on our rocker arms. The base circle is really the lowest point. If you look at a camshaft and you look at the lobe, the high point is where that lifter is riding on the actual lobe itself, and that's when the valve train opens. The rocker arm starts to do its thing. It pushes the valve open, and either the air intake comes in or the exhaust goes out when that valve's opened up. So we're going to need to rotate the engine. Now, when you're looking at a car and you're sitting in the car with the steering wheel, the left side, the driver's side, is going to be the odd number cylinders, and the passenger side or the right side is going to be your even number cylinders. Okay, so the front cylinder on the driver's side is number 1, and the front cylinder on the passenger side is always considered number 2 or even. So you have to understand those things right up front. Now what we're going to be doing, and make sure that you're careful, you don't want a lot of anything that hangs down, any kind of clothing that might get caught with your fan or any kind of long sleeves, things of that nature, but we're going to be bumping the engine over. And what makes that job a little bit easier is if you back the spark plugs out, maybe 3 or 4 turns. Like some people like to take them out. I like the engine to have a little bit of compression, very slightly. One, I can hear when air is leaking past that cylinder, so I can tell which cylinder is actually at top dead center. But number 2, it makes the engine turn over easier, but it's not so easy that it bumps or it goes past revolution-wise where you want it to stop. One of the things that I've found is when you take the spark plugs completely out and you're bumping it over, especially if you have a lot of high compression engine with pop-up pistons or something like that, is the engine will typically, when you let off the button or the ignition key, it'll keep rotating. There's really nothing there to stop it. So what I do is I back the spark plugs out maybe 3 or 4 turns. It allows enough of that compression to bypass everything, and yet it still has enough compression to slow the motor down. So when you're bumping it, you don't go past the point you want to. The other thing is you typically typically you want to take, you want to disable either your coil wire from your coil, but you want to make sure that you're not getting spark to the spark plugs. And again, every car is going to be different in that aspect, but you are going to have the leads or the spark plug leads off of your spark plugs because you're going to have to loosen them up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started. And one of the things that we have to know is the firing order of our engines, okay? And the reason is we're going to set the intake and the exhaust valves in a very specific sequence. And we're going to do it from side to side. Okay, you've got your tools. So one thing we have to do is make sure that we're working on an engine that is at operating temperature. That means it has to be hot or warm. We want to check the valve train when the engine's in that kind of a condition. Metal expands, which is the reason that we do that. We want to make sure that we adjust the valves so that when this thing reaches operating temperatures are set properly. The other thing that we need to know is what the firing engine of the specific engine we're working on is. In the case of the big block Chevrolet, the firing order is 18435672, and that's the order we're going to adjust the valves in. Now, the way I'm going to show you this has specifically to do when you have a bigger camshaft. And by bigger camshafts, I simply mean anything over a 500th inch lift, which isn't incredibly big, but there's some other ways to do it. One would be with the engine running the valve covers off, which is super messy, because oil goes everywhere and you adjust it until you stop hearing the lifters clack. The other way it has essentially to do with 2 rotations of the engine, which isn't really that accurate when you have a camshaft that gets over 500th inch lift. And this reason I'm going to do it this way. It's a little more work, but it's more specific to each valve, and it's never failed me, and it won't fail you either. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, we know our actual rotation, which way the engine rotates. We know the actual firing order. We have all our tools. The engine's warmed up, and from there, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, now we're ready to adjust the valves. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with number 1 intake, but we're not going to adjust number 1 intake. We're actually going to be adjusting its corresponding cylinder on the other side, number 6. But to do that, what we could do is we have to find number 1 cylinder intake valve fully open, which means that rocker arm is pushing down, that valve spring is compressed, and that intake valve for cylinder number 1 is fully open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bump the engine over until cylinder number 1 intake valve is fully compressed, and then we'll go over and adjust cylinder number 6's intake valve for its preload adjustment. There we go. Cylinder number 1 intake is fully compressed. Now we can go over and adjust cylinder number 6's intake valve. And that's the process that we're going to use for all the intake valves. We're going to start with number 1 intake, and the one we're starting with is always the one that's going to be completely open. That's not the arm we're going to adjust. We're actually going to adjust its matching arm on the other side of the engine. So for number 1 cylinder, we're going to adjust number 6. When we go to number 8 cylinder, which is next in the firing order, and that valve is completely open, that rocker arm and that valve spring is completely compressed, we're going to come over to cylinder number 5 and adjust that rocker arm. So that's how it works, guys. You're going to work from side to side of your engine. The one that's open, we're going to go to the corresponding one on the other side, the intake side, and adjust that valve. And we'll go through and we'll do the same thing for the exhaust. Like I said, this is a little bit more of a tedious process than the traditional. It's basically a full rotation of the motor where you set all the valves on one side and set all the valves on the other side and you're done. That's why it's helpful to have this remote starter. We're going to continually be bumping the engine. What you'll find though is you go from say cylinder 1 to cylinder 8. It doesn't take much of a rotation. As a matter of fact, it is literally the next rocker arm that starts to move when that camshaft starts to turn. So what you're going to do is you're going to find that you're just bumping that engine with the minimal amount of bump to get that next rocker arm going. And that's how you know you're doing it in the right step. If you adjust one and then you go into the next one and it has to rotate the engine once or twice, you've gotten out of sequence and you need to start over in regards to the location of which rocker arm is depressing the valve spring. But it's really simple once you get going. Like I said, you'll be adjusting, you'll be looking at the valve on one side, you'll be going to the other side and adjusting that valve, and that's how it works through the whole thing. Again, 1, and we adjust number 6, 8, we adjust number 5, and so on and so forth. Now, when it comes time to actually making the lash adjustment, we're going to be turning the nut that actually is on top of the rocker arm. Now, a lot of people will tell you to go ahead and roll that push rod between your finger. You reach underneath the rocker arm and you rotate that and you tighten the nut down until you feel slight resistance. Now, I have felt the actual push rods rotate even with some preload on them. So what I typically do is I'll turn the nut and grab the actual rocker arm itself and lift on the tip of the rocker arm. Look, if I can feel lash which means if I can move it at all up and down, any kind of vertical movement, that's going to be lash. I keep turning that nut on that rocker arm until I'm lifting on that rocker arm and it doesn't move anymore. It's a very light touch. It doesn't take much to add preload to a rocker arm. So what we're trying to do is find that moment where basically when you're lifting on the rocker arm, on the nose of that actual rocker arm itself, you don't feel that tapping or that clicking anymore. It essentially is at zero lash, and that's where we'll start our adjustments. Now, when it comes time to adjusting your preload, hydraulic lifters and solid lifters have a totally different way of doing it. A hydraulic lifter, and you always want to follow your camshaft manufacturer's recommendation, will have anywhere between a half a turn and a full turn of preload. So if we're talking about a full turn, what we're looking at is if this is 12 o'clock and this is 3 o'clock, that's a quarter of a turn. So half a turn would be from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, right? And if it was a full turn, it'd be a full 360 degrees. Again, a lot has to do with the camshaft manufacturer, type of lifter you're using, if it's a roller or if it's a flat tappet, whatever it might be, but those are going to be your adjustments. Somewhere in between a half and a full turn is what either your camshaft manufacturer or your lifter manufacturer is going to recommend. And I like to say, like I said, I like to start when I'm adjusting that nut at 12 o'clock if I have clearance, and go to that 3 o'clock, that's a quarter turn. And so I do have poly locks. I'll go ahead and insert my Allen wrench, and then the last little bit of the turn before I get down to 6 o'clock, I'll tighten that poly lock up against the actual stud itself. And then while turning the actual Allen wrench, I'll go ahead and turn the wrench on the rocker nut that actual last little bit, because you want to make sure those things are seated and that they're tight. We want the lock nut tight as far as the hex screw goes, but we also want the rocker arm tight. We don't want these things backing off. If you're using traditional, the crimp type style rocker arm nuts, understand those things were typically considered one use only, which means if you took them off or maybe replace your rocker arm to do something with your cylinder heads, really you need to get new ones. I've actually, especially with Pontiacs, they're very susceptible to the rocker arm nuts backing off if you reuse them. Ask me how I know, because I've done it. So if you're using stamped steel rocker arms that use the old school crimped nuts, that you know, they do a good job when they're new, but if you loosen them up or take them off and put them back on, my recommendation is that you go ahead and get new ones. Pulling your valve covers off your classic American muscle car truck once in a while isn't a bad idea. In my case, it allowed me to spot a problem before it actually became a real issue. In your case, it might be something as simple as just checking it out to make sure that it's staying nice and clean up there, or maybe it's a chance to make sure that your car's running up to its potential by adjusting its valve trains. Either way, guys, I hope you found this video informational. It helps you look. It's not hard to set your valves. Just follow that rotation, what I told you in regards to the firing order and the opposite cylinders that I mentioned that you adjust, and it's very straightforward. You're guaranteed that your engine is running up to absolute optimum performance every time. Not to mention, it gives you a good chance to get your hands dirty, get underneath the valve covers, and get a little wrench time in. Guys, I appreciate you watching this video. And at First Place Auto Parts, we have got tons of restoration performance parts. Everything you would need to make your car go faster, look better, or stop harder is all right there at one place at fpautoparts.com. If you ever need anything, please check it out. It's super easy to use and open, of course, 24 hours a day. Guys, until next time, keep the hammer down and keep it between the guardrails.